There is a specific kind of heartbreak that does not begin with an ending. It begins with a question so small you barely notice yourself asking it at first. A question that arrives quietly in the middle of ordinary moments and disappears before you have the chance to examine it properly. A cancelled plan, an unanswered message, a conversation where you leave feeling strangely lonely despite having just spent hours together. And somewhere underneath all of it, a thought appears, not loud enough to become a conclusion, not clear enough to become a certainty, just a question. Do I matter to them the way they matter to me? At first you dismiss it, because healthy relationships require understanding, because people get busy, because life becomes complicated, because everyone has limitations, and because the truth is that when we love someone, we naturally become generous interpreters of their behavior. We explain things, we rationalize things, we fill in gaps with explanations that protect the connection. Not because we are naive, because attachment always prefers hope over reality in the beginning. So you keep going, you keep showing up, you keep giving the benefit of the doubt. And individually, none of the moments feel large enough to build a case from. That is what makes this kind of heartbreak so difficult to recognize. It is not created by one devastating event. It is created through accumulation, the slow collection of evidence that never feels significant enough by itself but becomes impossible to ignore when viewed together. 100 small moments, 100 tiny disappointments, 100 occasions where your needs quietly took second place to something else. Until eventually you realize you are carrying a weight that cannot be traced back to a single source, only a pattern, the plans that were always easier to cancel when they involved you. The conversations where you listened with your full attention while feeling theirs drift in and out like a weak signal. The moments when something wonderful happened in your life. And they were not the first person you wanted to tell anymore because experience had taught you that their response would probably be smaller than your excitement. Not cruel, not intentionally hurtful, just smaller. And over time you learned to make yourself smaller too. You learned to need less, to ask for less, to expect less, because expecting less hurts less when disappointment arrives. Or at least that is what you told yourself. What you were actually doing was adapting to a relationship that required you to continuously reduce yourself in order to maintain it. And adaptation can be dangerous, because it rarely feels dangerous while it is happening. It feels mature, it feels patient, it feels understanding. You convince yourself that this is what real love looks like: compromise, flexibility, acceptance, the ability to love someone despite their limitations. But there is a difference between loving someone through their limitations and building your entire emotional life around them. And somewhere along the way, that line became blurred. You adjusted your schedule, adjusted your expectations, adjusted your standards, adjusted your needs, until one day you looked around and realized almost every adjustment had been made by you, and almost none had been made by them. That realization does not arrive dramatically. It arrives as exhaustion, a tiredness that sleep cannot fix, a heaviness that appears whenever you think about the relationship, a feeling that something is wrong even when nothing specific is happening. Because your body often understands what your mind is still negotiating with. Long before you consciously admit the truth, your nervous system has already begun reacting to it. It notices the imbalance, it notices the uncertainty, it notices the emotional distance, and it carries the burden, even while your conscious mind continues searching for explanations. If you have ever felt that burden, subscribe and turn on notifications for daily love psychology, because what happens next explains why some relationships hurt far more than they should, and why walking away can feel impossible even when you know something is wrong. The moment you finally knew was probably not dramatic. Most people expect clarity to arrive during a fight, a betrayal, a confession, a single unmistakable event. But clarity rarely arrives that way. More often it appears during an ordinary moment, a moment so ordinary that nobody else would recognize its significance. You needed them, not desperately, not dramatically, just genuinely. And before you even reached out, you already knew what the outcome would be. You knew they would be unavailable, or distracted, or emotionally absent, or present in body while absent in every way that actually mattered. And what shocked you was not the prediction. What shocked you was the certainty, because certainty meant this was no longer an exception. It was a pattern, and patterns tell the truth that individual moments can hide. In that moment, something shifted, not in the relationship, in you. Because for the first time, you stopped asking whether they could become the person you needed, and started confronting the possibility that they never intended to, that maybe they were already giving everything they planned to give, and that what felt temporary to you was permanent to them. That possibility changes everything, because now the question is no longer, will they choose me? The question becomes, why have I stayed so long waiting to be chosen? And that question is far more uncomfortable, because it leads somewhere deeper, somewhere older, somewhere that existed long before this relationship ever began. Because the truth is that most people do not remain in relationships like this because they are deeply loved. They remain because they are intermittently loved. And intermittent love creates a very specific psychological trap. Not because inconsistency feels good. It doesn't. It is exhausting, confusing, painful, but inconsistency creates something that certainty never has to create. It creates pursuit. When affection becomes unpredictable, attention becomes hyper-focused. Your mind begins tracking every signal, every text, every phone call, every moment of closeness, every moment of distance. Not because you are obsessed, because your nervous system is attempting to solve a problem. It is trying to discover the formula, trying to find the exact combination of behaviors that will finally produce consistency. So when they pull away, you search for answers. And when they come closer again, the relief feels enormous. Not because the relationship became healthy, because uncertainty briefly disappeared, and relief is easy to mistake for love. Many people spend years confusing those two feelings. The relationship begins hurting. Then the pain temporarily stops, and the absence of pain feels so good that it gets interpreted as intimacy. But intimacy and relief are not the same thing. One creates safety. The other temporarily interrupts fear, and somewhere inside this relationship, those experiences became tangled together. You were no longer just loving them. You were recovering from them, then loving them again, then recovering again, then loving again. The cycle repeated so many times that it started feeling normal, until eventually you could no longer tell where the relationship ended and the recovery began. If that realization is hitting harder than you expected, subscribe and turn on notifications for daily love psychology, because understanding the trap is the first step toward escaping it, and what comes next is the part that changes everything. Because eventually you begin asking yourself a question. Why does this particular person have so much power over me? Why them? Why does their attention feel more valuable than everyone else's? Why does their approval matter this much? And when you sit with those questions long enough, something uncomfortable begins to emerge. You realize it was never entirely about them. They mattered. Of course they mattered. You loved them. You shared experiences, memories, dreams, planes. But they also represented something larger, something deeper, something older. They represented certainty, belonging, safety, being chosen, being important enough that someone would move mountains rather than make excuses, being loved in a way that never left you guessing. And once you understand that, another realization follows. The thing you were chasing inside the relationship may not have originated inside the relationship at all. Because long before you met them, there was already a question living inside you, a question many people carry for years without ever realizing it. Am I enough for someone to stay? Am I enough for someone to choose? Am I enough for someone to prioritize? Relationships like this attach themselves directly to those questions. That is why they hurt differently. You are not just losing a person. You are losing the possibility that this person was finally going to answer something your heart has been asking for a very long time, and hope can keep someone attached to a relationship long after reality has left it. Because hope does not require evidence, only possibility. The possibility that next month will be different, the possibility that they will finally understand, the possibility that they will wake up one morning and recognize what they almost lost, the possibility that all the waiting will eventually make sense. And hope is beautiful. until it becomes a substitute for reality. Because then you stop evaluating what is happening and start investing in what might happen. You stop loving the relationship that exists and start loving the relationship that could exist. The future becomes more compelling than the present. Potential becomes more important than evidence. And that is one of the most dangerous places a heart can live. Because potential never has to prove itself. Reality does, and reality was quietly trying to tell you something for a very long time. Reality was in the unanswered calls, the broken promises, the emotional distance, the effort imbalance, the feeling in your chest that appeared every time you had to convince yourself not to notice what was obvious. Reality kept speaking. Hope kept translating, until eventually reality became impossible to ignore. And when that happened, something inside you finally broke. Not your love, your illusion, the illusion that if you just loved harder, waited longer, became easier to love, accepted more, needed less, and gave everything you had, they would eventually become the person you needed them to be. But people do not become different because they are loved. They become different because they decide to change. And those are not the same thing. No amount of your devotion could create a transformation they did not choose for themselves. No amount of your patience could build emotional availability inside someone who was not willing to develop it. No amount of your understanding could compensate for their lack of willingness. That realization is devastating, because it means there was never a version of this story where your love alone fixed everything. And yet it is also liberating, because it means their inability to love you fully was never proof that you were difficult to love. Those are very different conclusions. One creates shame. The other creates freedom. And for many people, freedom begins the moment they stop asking, "What was wrong with me?" and start asking, "What was I trying to earn?" Because healthy love is not earned, it is reciprocated. If that distinction is landing somewhere deep inside you right now, subscribe and turn on notifications for daily love psychology. Because the next part is the piece almost nobody talks about. The reason you still miss them long after you've accepted they were wrong for you. And why moving on is not actually about forgetting them.